We've already heard that sometimes contemporaries complained about Böcklin's rather modern take and unusual view of the ancient subjects. For example, here he uses a satirical take on our approach to show these nymphs playing in the surf of the water. You have nymphs somersaulting and whooping with joy, observing their peers, and here you have a baby with a fish tail, and in general they are boisterous and they are very loud and noisy. They are not at all restrained goddesses as they are supposed to be. You even get the voyeuristic gaze here and there, so there are men present and they're ogling the nymphs, but this is subverted by Böcklin's way of depicting the women and them just having fun. So this sense of subversion is something that is really notable here. This does not at all speak to the sort of voyeuristic impulses of the viewer, but rather brings a smile to our face. Another way of subversion with this old theme of bathing women is seen here where Félix Vallotton paints his baigneuses that were shown in the Salon des Indépendants in 1906 in Paris. He takes the opposite approach to subvert our expectations with this theme of bathing women. Félix Vallotton shows us slate gray water, divides the picture in these two spaces of light and water, and then he shows us these figures, these bathing women, gently playing in the water, but almost statuesque. Their bodies are not at all idealized. They almost look like stone sculptures, and everything seems to be frozen in time. In fact, you may get the impression that they're bathed rather in light than in water. 8 years after Arnold Böcklin had painted his initial version of the Island of the Dead, he followed with the Island of Life, which you see here. And in this vision of life, you see dancing people here in the middle ground. You have a procession of sorts in the foreground of a faun and a nymph, and basically there are swans everywhere. The atmosphere is that of a bright summer's day with rather friendly clouds, blue skies, and a Mediterranean flora. The comparison here is with Walter Kurt Wiemken. Walter Kurt Wiemken was a Basel-based painter, and he, like so many of his peers, was confronted with a problem of finding a way to relate to their famous predecessor, Arnold Böcklin. How would you do that? Like with a figure that towering in the city's history, you have to find a way. Either you take his influences for granted and you develop them, or you would just try to basically find your own way without ever referencing his art. Walter Kurt Wiemken chose the former, and he in fact probably directly relates to this work, The Island of Life, maybe even in the color scheme of this work that he painted in 1935. Walter Kurt Wiemken calls this work life, and what he shows us is not very reassuring. In the center of it all, he shows us the Sphinx as a very mercurial image, and at the heart of his vision of life is death. And this is just a fascinating reference to Böcklin, because he shows the Island of the Dead. It's like a quote that he inserts into his own picture. So basically what he's saying is, at the heart of life is death and destruction. And this is also how he references this group of dancing figures, probably a direct reference to the Island of Life by Böcklin, including a graveyard with a tombstone and a cannon. So this is a dark vision of life, which makes sense when you look at the date of creation, because it was done in 1935, and everybody at the time knew that war was coming. So Walter Kurt Wiemken suffered from this anxiety of impending war and gave it, found a way to depict his anxieties in this dark vision of what life actually means, including, and that is chilling even nowadays, I guess, these elements that probably signify something like nationalist tendencies, with these flags put up on a scaffolding that looks helter-skelter-like, and the globe that is positioned on the verge of downfall. It may be unexpected to think of Cy Twombly, the great abstract expressionist painter, and Arnold Böcklin, the great symbolist painter, as kindred spirits, but here we are. Both, in fact, shared their great love for mythology and for references to antique stories, and both also used them in non-narrative ways. So what do we mean by that? In fact, both in their oeuvre referenced stories from Homer or from Ovid in very concrete ways, as we've seen with Böcklin with his depiction of Odysseus and Calypso. But Böcklin also was revered for his ability to distill antiquity into these landscapes of the spiritual. And the most important work of that kind was the Sacred Grove, which you see here. The Sacred Grove actually operates similar to the Island of the Dead. There are signs that are given to us as the beholder, and we have to make sense of them, and these pictorial signs, they evoke an atmosphere and subsequently a feeling in the beholder. So here, for example, you have in the center a sacrificial fire. You have a procession of figures, priestly figures clad in white. Again, you have a liminal space because you have to traverse a distance to get to the sacrificial fire. This is marshland. You even see the reflection here. So this is muddy, and you have to traverse this pavement to get there. And it's a remote area of a temple district. The temple, in fact, is seen here through the trees. There is a figure, like a huge statue probably, that is illuminated by the afternoon sun. But the atmosphere of this grove is shadowy and withdrawn and solemn and very, very quiet. So by following these signs in the picture with your eyes, you start to make sense of the atmosphere, and there is this solemnity, the quiet spiritual aspect that basically is reflected in how you perceive the work. And it's really not that different to what Cy Twombly does. So where Böcklin gives us these signs and hints that are figurative, these figures, the priestly figures and the procession and the grove and the shadowy atmosphere and the sacrificial fire. Cy Twombly here in 1959, in this abstract time of expression, he uses numerical sequences, hints to ancient Greek culture by referencing the birthplace of Apollo and Artemis, the Aegean island Delos, or even rows of numbers that evoke the sort of realm of mathematics. So everything tends towards the spiritual, even the white surface of this nondescript painting. And then you get these scribbles, and even they, although they are not in a strict sense writing, reference the act of writing. At the outset, our intent was to get to know Böcklin better, and to, after realizing that there are so many facets to his oeuvre, we thought that it was just reasonable to juxtapose his work with that of his contemporary and predecessors and like-minded artists later on. And it gave us immense pleasure, and I hope I was able to convey that in this tour, to get to know him better, to encounter him, but also to see these encounters of his with other painters and sculptors. So I guess what we really wanted to do was give this sort of panoramic view, but at the same time find the elements, unexpected elements that click together and give a better sense of his personality, the pitfalls, the idiosyncratic aspects maybe, unconventional treatment of ancient myths, but also color that the contemporaries thought were garish and loud, subversive aspects, and so on. I guess I hope that this installation just accomplishes to give a broader picture of someone who was all too often shown as a monodimensional figure in art history in the late 19th century.